Okay, so let's go ahead and start. Again, my name is Diana Vasquez Ballesteros, and I'm here to actually do a quick introduction and welcome everybody. And I'm going to have basically introduce Francesca Negri, Deputy Director for the Department of Toxic Systems Control, who is going to go ahead and provide a quick welcome and run through of the agenda. So, Francesca.
Well, hello, everybody, and thank you so much for being here today. We're very excited to share with you in greater detail the workload analysis for the Site Mitigation and Restoration Program. And we're to share with you in greater detail, for those of you who were able to attend our sessions a couple of weeks ago. These workload analyses that DTSC undertook are a really important element of a comprehensive reform package the administration is proposing for DTSC. The reform package addresses, three major components, or three major questions, including what service levels should DTSC be providing to protect public health and the environment. More specifically, to create a California for all where each has equitable access to a healthy and robust environment and good public health. The workload analyses support the service levels by bringing transparency to what we're doing with our current resources, actions that we've taken to improve our service levels and our management of those resources, and to provide some examples of what we could do if we had more resources. The reform proposal also addresses the question of what fee structure should be put into place to support these service levels, both our current levels and any future levels contemplated. And that fee structure should be equally distributed amongst all fee payers, and should disincentivize mismanagement of hazardous waste. The final question the proposal addresses is what governance structure should be put in place to increase transparency and accountability for all of DTSC's programs and services. The work that we do here at DTSC is crucially important to California and to protecting public health and the environment. And the administration's proposal builds on years of service improvements and programmatic improvements that really are impacting DTSC's ability to achieve its mission. The work we do contributes to economic vitality, particularly in communities where there's been a disproportionate burden of toxic substances and exposure to hazardous waste. And over time, DTSC has been hampered by an increase in statutory authorities that were unfunded and fiscal constraints, and then finally a static fee structure that was last updated in 1998 and did not contemplate the evolution of strategies that would better manage hazardous waste in the state of California. This proposal makes a very significant investment into DTSC. And we're so excited to be engaging in conversations with you about service levels and how this workload information can bring transparency to those conversations. I'm excited that you're here. I'm appreciative of your engagement, and I'm looking forward to engaging with you further during the Q&A section of today's presentation. So the agenda for today is simply this. Deputy Director for our Site Mitigation and Restoration Program, or our cleanup program, Grant Cope, is going to walk you through the workload analyses for his program. The full analyses with the key findings document is available on DTSC's website if you haven't already been able to access it at www.dtsc.ca.gov. And Deanna, if you would put that in the chat, that would be fantastic. So I'm going to hand the mic over to Grant and let him walk you through our cleanup program. Thanks, everyone.
Great. Thanks very much, Francesca. Hi, everybody. My name is Grant Cope. I am the Deputy Director for the Site Mitigation Restoration Program here at DTSC, Cleanup Program. I'm going to, as Francesca said, lead you through just kind of a high-level overview of the workload analysis and then hopefully we can dig into the details as we get into the Q&A. So the cleanup program, what are we about? We protect communities. We protect people. The work we do, we focus on just protecting the people across the state of California, revitalizing communities. So when I talk to the staff, when I think about, every day when I get up, what's the mission? That's the mission. Roughly 1 in every 3 people in California lives within a mile of a site that we're working on. And about 50% of those sites are in environmental justice communities. We have got sites in every assembly and Senate district. So we're across the state in communities. And we've been there for a while doing really good work. All totaled, we've investigated or cleaned up somewhere around 8,800 sites. This includes, roughly 2,500 schools that has resulted in roughly 30,000 new classrooms. So, we're there doing good things for communities. Next slide, please. We are also a science-based organization. Everything we do revolves around using good science to make cleanup decisions. Fully 88% of the staff we have are scientists, geologists, toxicologists, engineers. We've got multidisciplinary staff that assist us in meeting our mission. So basically everything, whether we're in the field or in the office, we're using science to kind of undergird, to frame our decisions. Next slide, please. So once again, as I said, we've been in communities for a while now, for decades, and we do track our performance. We've provided some high-level performance metrics right here. The important thing in my mind with this slide is that it kind of emphasizes what the focus of the program is and needs to be even more in the future. We need to set goals. We need to develop metrics in order to achieve those goals. And then we need to track our ability to meet those metrics and to deliver to people and communities across the state. Next slide, please. This just gives you a flavor for the fiscal year 2018-2019 work that we did. Significant amount of school sites. DTSC by statute works on school sites that receive state funding for construction activities. Significant amount of evaluation. Also voluntary cleanups. We also did corrective action for those of you who aren't as enmeshed in the details of hazardous waste and hazardous substance law. Corrective action is just one way of saying we were cleaning up one set of contaminants that are known as hazardous waste rather than another set of contaminants that were known as hazardous substances. So, but we were once again, tracking the types of sites that we are working on so that we know the whole array of different types of activities that we're undertaking. Next slide, please. So, back on the tracking issue, I think a good example of where the department has done a tremendous amount of work and has used the resources that the state has provided to it in a very efficient and effective fashion is cost recovery. Just a broad overview, here's what happened. 2013, DTSC basically looked within itself and found that they had unrecovered cleanup costs. Now, this is to be expected in any cleanup program that's run by the state because generally the policy is the state will step in to protect people when there is not a responsible party there to do the work. Or if there's not a responsible party there who can pay to do the work. And so there will always be some unrecovered costs. What what DTSC found was followed up on by the state auditor's office, and they tabulated up using their analyses, their findings, and made recommendations. And what DTSC did was set out a plan, got resources to implement the plan, and has delivered really strong results. When you take a look at the number of sites, we call it the audit backlog. That's essentially the number of sites that were involved in that assessment by the state auditor's office. 92% reduction in those sites. When you take a look at, once again, it's a kind of the audit backlog for unrecovered costs. It's an 81% reduction. So we're seeing really good, strong, measurable results when we have a good plan, get the resources to implement it, and then execute. Next slide, please. This is something that's near and dear to my heart. We are basically laying out a pathway for the program to increase its efficiency, transparency, and accountability through the development of a strategic plan and a program enhancement work plan that kind of are joined hand in glove. The strategic plan sets up the big goals, KPIs, the key performance indicators that we will use to track our progress in achieving our goals. And the work plan really looks at the implementation side. So when I was emphasizing in the prior slide the importance of having a plan and executing on it, the program enhancement work plan is really the beginning of that process. There's other things that I could talk about as well. We've got people who are working on what are called, go back to those hazardous waste sites, that are using visual management tools. Those are broadly adopted in private industry. And their application, along with other decision-making tools that, once again, increase transparency of the decision-making process, allow you to identify where you're not hitting your marks, and then provide you with basically ways of expediting the decision-making process. It's turning in really good results at the sites that are called, they're federal sites. They're called GIPRA sites. But it means that we're making real progress using tools to make basically site decisions across the state more efficiently and more effectively. Next slide, please. Yeah, I want to take just a bit of time to talk about a couple of different sites. These are good ones in my mind because they demonstrate kind of a breadth of the sites that we work on, but also the importance that our cleanup decisions can make for one of the things that is at top of the line for this administration, which is housing. So we're doing oversight on the Sacramento rail yards. That will result in quite literally thousands of housing units, as well as a medical complex and a soccer stadium. There's another cleanup in Carson that's really part of a commercial and residential hub that the city of Carson is doing. And Carson's an environmental justice community. So they've got this commercial and residential hub. We cleaned up north of 60 acres as part of that development. And one of the things that is part of that development is the Porsche Experience Center, where you get to drive race cars. And that's generated tremendous returns for the community. Next slide, please. This slide really speaks to the overall need for increased resources to protect people and revitalize communities. There's an estimated 200,000 undiscovered contaminated sites in California. DTSC, due to restrictions in allowable funding, we don't have a site discovery program anymore. We do get referrals from locals. We work with US EPA. We get a lot of voluntary agreements, people coming in requesting our oversight so that they know that they're doing a good job. But in terms of going out and actually identifying sites that pose a threat to people right now in their communities, and then investigating and addressing those threats. We don't have that program. We know, let's say out of the estimated 200,000, of about 15,000 different sites where if we did have a site investigation program, we'd be in the field today doing work to protect communities. So there's a big need out there, and we are an important part of filling that need. Next slide, please. So we did some analysis and took a look at what it would take for us to begin to make a substantial step forward in those 200,000 estimated sites. And it's going to take years, right? It's a problem that has taken more than 100 years of industrial development in California to get us here. And it's going to take a long time to address it. But from our estimates, around 195 staff members for the cleanup program, we could cover the sites that we know of and some of the ones that are out there that we don't know of yet, and begin to initiate action on them. And then, of course, we don't work in isolation. We work with budgets and contracting and public participation. When you take a look at what would be needed across the department for that, it's really 334 staff members who help us out when we're conducting the activities in communities. Next slide, please. So this is, I'm kind of echoing back to where, an earlier slide. To me, self-evaluation and tracking is really important. The workload analysis process that we went through in developing this output, it speaks to the importance of knowing your strengths and weaknesses, analyzing them, tracking, creating metrics and tracking your performance. And then this is kind of where we are right now. We need feedback. We love to hear from people about the workload analysis, about our programs. This is the key part, because this is where we hear from people who we serve and who we want to serve better. With that, I'll hand it back to Francesco or you, Diana.
Okay. And if we can go to the next slide, please. Awesome. So really, this is a moment for this group of individuals to actually ask their questions. And these are instructions of how to ask a question in this platform. So if you're able to actually want to ask a question through the audio, just go ahead and raise your hand and we will definitely call on you. And if you have a question that you would prefer to actually provide it through the text-only chat platform, go ahead and write your question and we'll go ahead and ask the question to one of our panelists. So we have Grant, who just went ahead and explained a little bit on the site mitigation workload analysis, and then also Francesca Negri, who can actually provide a little bit more substance on the reform efforts. And then with that, and also one of the things we can provide through the chat is provide you all, again, the slide decks that we shared with this group yesterday afternoon, so we can reshare that so you all can have that. And then after this presentation, we're going to be sharing this set of slides for your reference, okay? So I'll go ahead and see if folks have questions, and I have one on the queue, so hold on. So the first question is Ingrid Brostrom from Center Race Poverty and Environment. Ingrid, go ahead.
Great. I have a couple of questions, but they're all kind of centered on the same thing. I really did appreciate the additional information on some of the performance standards, where some of the estimates were taken from. I did see that there was not any performance goals on the timeliness of cleanups, i.e., how do we reduce time from first discovering that a site is contaminated to when a remedial action is ultimately adopted. So that's one is, has there been any thought about decreasing that time and really focusing on getting to the remediation stage. Also, the slideshow talked about a site discovery team. And it seems like without that, we're really not going to make a dent into the 200,000 contaminated sites that are awaiting discovery. And so has there been any thought on what it would take to create a site discovery team that's effective, i.e. how much staff, how many more resources would we need for that? And then given just the sheer scope of the issue, it seems like we're really talking about just, kind of keeping the same system, but because of the scope of the problem, has there been any thought to really what it would take to scale up in terms of perhaps doing things a little bit differently to actually address those 200,000 sites, in a reasonable amount of time? And I'll stop there.
Yeah, no, those are great questions. I'll take them in reverse order. Great questions and just great observations. So in terms of scaling up, yeah, there are different ways in which we can more quickly scale up. So for example, you can do regional investigations. That way you're kind of focusing energy on particular communities, particular regions. You can even break it down further by doing particular types of sites within communities or regions, because that allows you certain efficiencies of scale in terms of contracting and the types of activities that it would take to do investigations and cleanup. So absolutely, there are ways in which you can more quickly scale up. We've also taken quite a bit of thought into how do you actually create a site discovery program. We're not starting from square one. The DTSC used to have it. I've been deputy director for about a year, but it was some years before that when the department had it. So it's atrophied a little bit. But luckily, we're still doing the same types of investigations that we used to. We're just doing them on a much more narrow set of sites. So we can, we've got the know-how to actually create the site investigation team, and we've got the skills to actually employ on the team. This is, where you began, Ingrid, is perfect. So the question was, have you guys thought about kind of metrics or key performance indicators with respect to getting from an investigation to a cleanup decision? And it's really going to vary by site type. So you can take a look at something like China Lake, which is a huge federal facility with hundreds of different contaminated areas. And each one of those contaminated areas is going to have its own cleanup approach. Compare that against something like a very straightforward, a situation where a developer wants to go into a brownfield, clean up contamination. There's not much of it there. Let's assume there's not groundwater and contamination. There's just soil contamination. And then we would, employ some cleanup approach for that. There's just going to it's going to vary a lot between the time to deal with something like China Lake and the time to deal with one site. What we've done, or what the plan is to do, and you'll see this in the strategic plan, is we want to break down each kind of the decision points that you make to get between point A and point B, and begin to, I'm going to bore people, so I apologize, but begin to code the time that we spend on each one of those activities, set metrics that people will meet on an annual basis for those types of activities, and then track performance to see, okay, is that right? Is that wrong in terms of what the metric is? Are we meeting it? Are we not? And if not, why not? So when you take a look at the big picture, it's hard given the diversity of sites. What we're trying to do is go even smaller so that we can apply those same decision-making processes across sites, and thereby come up with a more routine way of gauging progress. The only exception to that, and this is what I'll mention, is where we're going from an actual document to getting the cleanup going, I guess is one way of describing it, so that we've already got a cleanup document, like a record of decision. When do we initiate construction? And you'll see in the strategic plan that there is that metric there.
Okay, thank you, Grant. We have another question in the queue, specifically through the chat, is by Jane Williams. She indicated one of the questions is, when will the agency release its Big If tool? This tool will help the agency prioritize sites that are impacting groundwater and drinking water contamination.
Yeah, so we, just people who aren't familiar, so Spigot is a geographic information system tool that uses various data layers to identify areas that represent a significant risk to groundwater quality. So they look at potential sources of contamination and try and predict out plumes relative to groundwater resources. It's something that we use now internally on some of our sites, not all of them. In terms of a timeline, there is no set timeline. We continue to use it internally, and it's one of the things that we work with the water board on as well. But to my knowledge, there is no set timeline for the release of that tool.
And then another question we have in the queue from Jane Williams as well is, when will the agency finalize the vapor intrusion rule?
So there's a couple different vapor intrusion things that are out there. I guess I'll go down kind of the list at the risk of over answering the question. There's the supplemental guidance that the water board and DTSC is working on. We're really in the final phases of that. So we anticipate in the next couple of months that guidance document will be issued. We're also working on DTSC in conjunction with various other organizations who are doing a peer review. We're doing basically a study to take a look at whether there's sufficient information to develop any type of California-specific vapor intrusion attenuation factor. That once again is kind of more months off in terms of it being finalized. So those are the two that are most, I think, relevant, and hopefully answers the question that Jane has.
Thank you, Grant. And we have somebody in the queue who wants to ask a question, and that will be Josh Tucker. And I'm going to go ahead and have you ask your question. Josh? I think you're on mute.
Oh, okay. How's that?
Yes, you're good.
Okay. I have two questions, and I apologize. They're kind of multi-layered, just like the cleanup program. So I guess the first question is how DTSC goes about prioritizing the selection of sites for not only site discovery or evaluation, but also for remediation. I mean, given that we know about 15,000 and or potentially 200,000, how are we prioritizing these? Are we looking at sites that have responsible parties? Are we using Cal and ViroScreen to target certain communities that may be overly impacted? Are we looking at just orphan sites? There's all kinds of different sites, from mines to other things. Like, I'm just really curious how the department is prioritizing, like what the plan is. So that's kind of like the first layered question. The second layered question kind of dovetails on what Ingrid had asked, dealing with a metric for the timeliness of the beginning and the end of a cleanup project. And this kind of, I'm kind of curious about the Lean Six Sigma that Grant, you had mentioned. I'm kind of curious exactly what that's focused on, because that sounds like it might be similar. But kind of the basis of my question on the timeliness is, according to the workload analysis document in 1819, DTSC had worked on 1,756 sites and completed 161 projects. I understand those projects may be multi-year. However, at that kind of a pace, again, I know that's not perfectly an apples to apples comparison, but it would take 10 years or so just to finish those existing sites. So I guess the question is back to how DTSC focus its work. Does it tackle one site and then finish it, or does it work on a bunch a little bit at a time? Because I have heard from various stakeholders in the past about the potentially lack of timeliness, lack of efficiency, so to speak, on closing out a project. And I know they're not all the same, and there will be projects that, things will pop up. So that's kind of my my two rather layered questions. Apologize for the length, but thank you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Excellent questions, Josh. Thank you very much. In terms of prioritization, I'll describe what we do now, and then I'll give you a preview for what's in the strategic plan and work plan. What we do now is we use statutory criteria to assess essentially risks to human health. And now, when I'm talking about these, I'm talking about orphan sites. We use statutory criteria to assess the risks to human health, and then we get funds to work on a subset of all of those sites that we know exist, that we've done some amount of work on, and that we know are orphan. We're not able to do all of the work that we know needs to be done, but that's because of limited resources. So we do take into consideration environmental justice and several other factors, but it's more of a qualitative way, not in a quantitative way. With orphan sites, it's really, I think all orphan sites are in environmental justice communities. So all are like a significant percentage. So that's what we do right now with orphan sites. With other sites, voluntary agreements, we will work on, much like the water board, we will work on other sites when people come to us and sign up through an agreement process. And that is really, we are out there talking to people, but we're not necessarily prioritizing their work. They come to us. And then there's just a variety of other sites that we will work on. For example, federal facilities is a really good example, where the government has outstanding responsibilities. We do work overseeing their cleanups and investigations. And we do go through a process there of prioritizing with, for example, the Department of Defense on an annual basis, which work gets to the top of the line based on protections for public health, but also just a coordinated response to really complex and heavily contaminated sites. I could go on. There are school sites, there are other enforcement sites where we've got enforcement orders. But that's kind of broadly speaking an overview. I will say that what you'll see in the strategic plan and program enhancement work plan is a more explicit call out in a quantitative way for work in environmental justice communities. That's in recognition of the fact that the environmental justice communities are already overburdened by contamination. A 2018 Cal EPA report put up by OEHA also took a look at the racial composition, and communities of color are also disproportionately within environmental justice communities. So we're going to develop a more explicit call out for equity considerations as part of the allocation of those funds, understanding that that is part of our mission. It's to protect people who are vulnerable across the state. In terms of the metrics for timeliness, the Lean Six Sigma, I said a couple of different things. One was Lean Six Sigma, another was kind of visual tools. The best example of the visual tools and the metrics or timelines is with what we've done at those GPRA sites, Government Performance and Results Act sites, which are sites that are under kind of a federal authority to clean up. What we did is we took standard timelines that US EPA has developed for each phase of the cleanup process at these sites contaminated with hazardous waste. And staff basically put it up on a board. So they have each phase from beginning investigation to completion of the cleanup. And then the timelines are kind of where that starts. If you think of a big whiteboard, back when people used to be in the same room working together, that's what they did. They created these boards, and at the top they put, I'm not going to say this specifically, but they would say, a year, 365 days for investigation, 8 months for a corrective measure study, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, using what EPA had produced. And then they would literally put each one of their projects on the whiteboard and measure progress. The interesting thing about this is they noticed certain similarities that they hadn't really noticed before when they had this visual management tool. So, for example, they noticed that where there were intransigent responsible parties. Well, let me start with what they noticed, that when things were delayed before they got to the record of decision, they got to talking and they were like, yeah, there's a lot of intransigent or responsible parties. So what they did is they put together a process of saying essentially, look, it's either this or we begin to, penalize you. We're not going to, delay this another month so that you can go back and forth on data with us. Another good example is that they noticed that there were also kind of similarities in certain types of sites regarding different, problems. So I think complex groundwater contamination sites with overlapping plumes. And once again, it's that this is where the project manager's, art comes in, is that they need to talk with each other in order to solve these problems. Sorry, I've gone over on this one. I love this issue. So you've hit a bright spot in kind of my view of what this means. In terms of the 1,700 versus the site actions initiated, I just want to clarify the roughly 1,800 sites that we work on. That's everything from investigation all the way to operation and maintenance and land use controls that we review. The 160 some odd sites, forget the exact number now, but that number is everything from somebody coming in saying, we would like you to review our preliminary endangerment assessment, essentially a overview for a particular area to see if there is contamination there, all the way to a full-blown cleanup. So it really, it's a pretty broad gamut for what the types of activities would be included.
And Josh, thanks so much for the question. I also just want to point out how much work our cleanup program has been doing in looking for areas that are common to complex sites and identifying opportunities for process improvement and then establishing metrics for those. In fact, we've got a dashboard that we're working on for the department and are looking forward to getting your feedback on to ensure we're measuring the right things. But it's related to remedy construction, and it's the KPI that's included in our strategic plan and it's basically to complete construction of remedies within 2 years of the final remedy approval. We've got timelines established for that, and we're tracking and holding ourselves accountable to those timelines. Additionally, in our strategic plan, we have, streamlining our voluntary cleanup process. Ingrid, to your question of, what are we looking at internally to improve our processes under the things that are under our control related to the cleanups that we oversee. So we are constantly looking at ways to streamline our process, our business processes, while we use kind of what they call in the IT world an agile approach to process improvement and to improving communication.
Yeah, and I'll mention one other important one. I often say that we are a program that runs on contracts, and we've got another Lean Six Sigma process improvement on our contracting, on our side of the contracting process, because the quicker we can get from a scope for a contract to the field, the better our program is, and the more we can serve the communities.
Okay. No, thank you. Thank you, Francesca and Grant. And I have another clarifying question. In one of the slides specifically, where the 195 PYs, it was indicated that if we were able to clean up all the known orphan sites, it will take up to 100 years. Just to clarify that, if that's accurate or what needs to be clarified.
Yeah, so the 195 is to initiate action. Cleanups can take several years to complete. And so we don't have a current estimate on the total amount of time that it would take to complete cleanups at all those sites. But we're able to estimate what it takes to actually initiate work there.
So, and this actually, goes back to Ingrid's question about a discovery team. Ingrid, I'm going to answer that question a little bit more directly, which is to say that in the workload analyses itself, we've been pretty transparent about the fact that although we're conducting discovery and investigation when we have resources to do so, we aren't adequately resourced for a site discovery and investigation program. And so the workload analyses provides 3 different levels of service with different resource levels associated with it, and an estimate of how many sites we could begin to conduct discovery on and conduct an investigation on with those number of resources. And then the cleanup costs associated with those would be on top of the resources that we estimated for site discovery and investigation. So I hope that clarifies the response to your question.
Okay, thank you, Francesca. And I have another question through the chat, specifically from Chris Maurer. And it's basically, how much does DTSC currently rely on outside contractors for the investigations and actual cleanup sites as opposed to in-house DTSC staff? For example, with 161 sites cleared for reuse in 2018-2019, how many of the 55% of the projects that required cleanup involving treating, removing, or capping materials involved DTSC contracting with qualified outside parties to do the boots on the ground work?
Yeah, good question. Essentially, we do a lot of our work doing oversight on contractors. So for Orphan Sites, we contract out for the work, but we're reviewing the plans, making certain they comply with California's very rigorous scientific standards and public health safeguards. And then we're out in the field overseeing the work when it's done. And we're also reviewing all of the reports that determine whether we can say if the site has met cleanup standards. Similarly, when at military sites, which I referenced earlier, the military hires contractors to do their work. So we are largely we hold the Department of Defense responsible for complying with all of the standards, but we're overseeing the contractors that are working for the Department of Defense. So the short answer is a significant, the vast majority is done by contractors, of the work is done by contractors under our oversight.
And just to further refine that a bit, the type of work is different. The work that we're doing is with, as Grant indicated, 88% of our employees in the site mitigation are technical staff providing, engineers and scientists providing that technical oversight of the work that's actually being done to remediate the property, and that work is it's very different, and our role is different than the contractor's role.
Okay, no, thank you. And I have another question in the queue, and specifically, this is for Ingrid Bostrom. So how does emergency response cleanup factor in the remediation program? Does it displace resources or change priorities for the program areas?
Yeah, emergency response is much more, I think of it as much more punctuated, where there is a barrel that spills on a highway, for example. Or another good example is the fire response, where they're going to each one of the affected properties and identifying hazardous waste before additional individuals can go in there and take out the solid waste. They want to go in, identify, get it cleaned up, and then their job is done, and not totally done, because obviously fire recovery includes a lot more than that. But that's really that's their sweet spot. With the cleanup program, we will do removal actions, is what they're called, short-term removal actions. But it's not necessarily a barrel overturning or an immediate risk that is just discovered. It's more of a significant risk that is more complex, if you will. But importantly, they both rely on largely the same authorities. They're just driven to a different purpose.
Mm-hmm. And I think on that too, Grant, Ingrid also added, and specifically on wildfires, knowing that they're a reoccurring event, how do we calculate the increase of resources and shifting those resources, given that it's obviously a natural disaster that we're seeing actually increasing, not decreasing? Is that something that we're factoring in?
So the wildfire responses run out of a different program than the cleanup program. So I would defer. It's a good question. We can get back to you with the response, Ingrid. I'm just not familiar with how the estimates are projected, but we can let you know that.
Ingrid, our wildfire responses out of our emergency enforcement and emergency response division. Hopefully you'll be able to attend the workload analysis presentation on that program. But yeah, we have an entire unit that's dedicated to that, and we work with the Department of Finance and Office of Emergency Services to obtain funding to support contracts that go out and do remediation of household hazardous waste in response to California wildfires. So we absolutely see that as a continuing need, an increasing need. And we're working, with our partners to ensure there's adequate funding for future activities.
Okay, no, thank you. And I have another question within the chat, specifically just trying to get a status update on the LabRIC report and just trying to see what, the status.
The status is that it's currently undergoing review. We acknowledge that it's late. We want to get it out as much as, believe me on this, as much as I'm sure everybody else in the state wants to get it out. So once that review is complete, we'll post it and send it out to people who are interested in this new and really important program.
Okay. Other than that, I don't see any additional questions. Any additional questions from the folks on the phone? Just in a moment. I don't see any raised hands. So with that, we have about 10 minutes to spare and provide you all with the ability to definitely give us an opportunity to obviously share the PowerPoint, and also if there's any additional questions after going through the slide decks that we went ahead and shared through the chat and also through email, feel free to reach out to, again, myself, to Grant, and Francesca as the DTSC team, and we can reroute those questions as needed. We're going to be following up with another presentation starting tomorrow at 10 in the morning, 10 to 11, to just talk about the Safer Consumer Program. And then from there, next week, we have 2 presentations on the Hazardous Waste Program. There's going to be 2 different parts, given that there's 4 programs on those. It is from 3 to 4 and 4 to 5. And if you haven't registered for those or you need the links, please feel free to email me. I'll be more than happy to send that. And then, so this is going to be the conclusion of this specific briefing. But Grant, Francesca, do you have any last minute thoughts?
I would just like to thank people for taking time. I know that you guys are doing a lot of different things, juggling really tremendous schedules. And I very much appreciate you taking the time to be here and ask questions.
I'll just echo that. Thank you so much for your interest at DTSC, and we look forward to engaging with you in the future and in continuing these conversations about service levels and what we can do to better serve you in the state of California. Thanks so much.